I was thinking about some pictures of Kim Jong Un today, where he goes to these all girls schools and he's dressed all in gray, and the girls are just crying. And this phenomenon is not restricted to North Korea. Young teenage girls cry for older men all over the world, but usually they don't do it for the leader of the country. Usually they do it for pop stars like Justin Bieber. And when I ask why do young teenage girls like Justin Bieber, I am pointed toward the answer that they're really just looking at his physical beauty. Um, Someone like Ed Sheeran might have a good voice, but if he's not physically beautiful, I don't think he really gets those teenage girls going. It's a phenomenon that goes back to Elvis Presley and has precedence in Lord Byron. So this is not a new phenomenon, and it's clearly not exclusive to Europeans. We see uh, these Korean teenage girls crying. We see American teenage girls crying. And they're crying for different people in America and the Western world. It's usually for pop stars, and in North Korea it happens to be the dictator. But I was sort of thinking, why are these girls crying for Justin Bieber? Is it a pure like Freudian sexual thing? I mean, you could go in that direction, and I guess that would be the simplest and most provocative direction. But I would prefer to go in a slightly different direction and say that when we look at a beautiful face, there are class implications there. Now, not talking about rich versus poor, because there are different types of rich people. So a church can be like the Catholic Church, the Pope could be rich, he could be powerful. But obviously, religious power and religious wealth operates a little bit differently from that of, an aristocracy, a warrior aristocracy, or a mercantile class. These three classes, the warrior, merchant, and priest, they operate differently. They see the world differently. So when I talk about class, I'm not talking about rich versus poor. I'm talking about merchant, warrior, and priest. And when we talk about beauty, the first thing we recognize is that most religions around the world, and maybe like European paganism would be an exception to this, but most religions around the world, their attitude toward physical beauty is it's not as important as other more spiritual, otherworldly things. So, for example, in a lot of Eastern religion, the concept of beauty is like the beauty of your virtue, the beauty of your purity, the beauty of your morality. We see this in Christianity, we see this in Eastern religion. Buddhism will say, hey, don't get attached to your body. Don't worship the body, because the body's temporary. And so we're not going to invest emotionally into the body. We're not going to worship beautiful material things, because those are just going to pass away. We need to focus on spiritual virtues, like of disattachment and relief from suffering. And Christianity sort of says, hey, don't worry about someone's physical appearance. Don't judge a book by its cover. If someone's poor, they can still be virtuous. If someone's rich, they can still be evil. And you see this also in Judaism, at least in the Old Testament, that King Solomon, he says, I may be rich, I may be powerful, but without God, I'm nothing. You see others like King Saul who seem to be powerful, but they actually do evil. So there is a lot of religious work around the world, cross-cultural, that seems to de-emphasize the physical appearance, the physical body, and the material world, and seems to emphasize spiritual virtues and things of the next world, or another world, or a higher world, some kind of abstract ideal, right? So we would think that out of the three classes, warrior, priest, and merchant, that priests wouldn't really be concerned with the body so much. They wouldn't really be concerned with someone's face or their beauty. On the other hand, when we look at the merchant versus the warrior, when merchants think of beauty, they're often thinking about jewelry, expensive clothing, plastic surgery, makeup. They're thinking about ways that they can artificially augment the body in order to provide this gaudy beauty, in order to provide this extravagance, right? So that's typically the mercantile view of beauty. And furthermore, if we look at the nude, a warrior nude is an artistic nude. It's a nude that's not meant to arouse or to be erotic, but it's a nude to present the symmetry and the perfection, the mathematical perfection of the proportions of the body, which often relate to the golden rule, which is a sort of a, I wouldn't say necessarily a pseudo-mathematical concept, because there is some sort of scientific validation to it. If you look at the patterns of seashells and you look at the ratios within a seashell, for example, in many different kinds of plants, they follow this golden rule. What is it, like a 16 to 9 proportion, or I forget what exactly the proportion is. Anyway, when we talk about mercantile nudes as opposed to warrior nudes, we're really talking about the distinction between a pornographic nude and an artistic nude. You look at an artistic nude, traditional European nudes, you look at the nude women in European paintings from hundreds of years ago, and it's not pornographic. It's not something that you start, having feelings of arousal or eroticism. But you can recognize the beauty of the proportions, and you can see the symmetry of the face and the body, and it's all there as something that's admirable, something that you look up to, something that you would aspire to, something that you admire. Whereas a mercantile nude, a pornographic nude, is one that maybe the proportions aren't perfect, maybe the symmetry isn't perfect, but maybe there is an element of good proportion or good symmetry, but it is meant to arouse, it is meant to titillate, it is meant to be erotic. And so that would be one difference, I think, between like a warrior concept of a nude and a mercantile concept of a nude, and the fact that the mercantile concept of physical beauty usually has to do with something adding on, or it's either erotic or it's augmented with jewelry, with clothing, etc. I think I've made my point now. And let's see. So when we look at the phenomenon of teenage girls worshiping Justin Bieber in the same way that Korean girls worship Kim Jong-un, you have to question, is there an ancestral desire here for Justin Bieber to be king? And I think there is. I think there is, because the reason Justin Bieber is loved is for his physical beauty, and as I've discussed here, I think his beauty is a kind of, it has a class connotation, that when you see a beautiful person, you're assuming that this beauty is a production of a system of warrior ethics. A system of, like if we look at famous mercantile cultures around the world, whether we're looking at Chinese mercantile cultures, whether we're looking at Arab mercantile cultures or other Middle Eastern mercantile cultures, when we look at people who describe themselves as mercantile, or we look at a mercantile class, or we look at the average profile of someone who's successful in banking or finance, or someone who's really interested in that sort of thing, if we try to, in our minds, draw up an average picture, what would that person look like? Well, throughout history, in Europe at least, there have been a lot of different connotations formed in mythology around the concept of loving money. So, for instance, we think of a goblin, like in Harry Potter. The goblin is a creature in the world of Harry Potter that loves money. Goblin's not very physically beautiful. The goblin might like shiny, ornate jewelry. It's not to say that the goblin doesn't have a concept of mercantile beauty or wealth or whatever, but that this is different from a warrior ethos or a priestly ethos. And, what the priest would consider beautiful would not be physical at all, but it would be some abstract virtue. Another one might be like a witch. A witch in Legend of Zelda, you have someone like Ganondorf. In his physical appearance, you wouldn't necessarily call it beautiful. Certainly there is a certain proportion to his face, and there is a certain intimidating quality about him, but you wouldn't necessarily call him beautiful. Whereas like Zelda, you would say, oh, that's a beautiful princess, or Link himself, oh, that he has a beauty to his face. And again, it's not a sexual beauty, but it's a beauty, I think, that ultimately has class origins. That if you have a class of people that cares about acquiring material wealth, has a different selective pressure on that population versus a population that cares more about the physical body, your athleticism, your performance in sports, in hunting, in warfare, produces a very different kind of face, as opposed to a culture that's more concerned with priestly abstract virtues and detachment from the world and adherence to some kind of abstinence or celibacy or whatever. These three general cross-cultural ideas, they're going to produce different trends, different selective pressures. So I think when teenage girls look at Justin Bieber, they think, oh, he's a warrior king. Because he certainly doesn't look like a priest. You know, he doesn't have that mundane, homely sort of face that we would expect a priest to have. We would sort of expect a priest to either have like a baby face or like a grumpy old face, but we don't really expect priests or a priest class to be bred to have a beautiful face. Likewise, we don't really expect a mercantile class to be bred for physical virtue. We really expect the warrior class to be the pinnacle of physical virtue and appearance and beauty in that sense. So I think there is this identification with teenage girls in America. They see Justin Bieber and they are crying out for him to rule over them. Now we can question about the efficacy of Justin Bieber actually being the monarch of any Western country. I'm not sure how that would work out. I'm not sure that would be a good idea. But it seems like innately, instinctively, this is what people want. And that is manipulated by the merchant class because, of course, Justin Bieber is not a self-made man. Justin Bieber is a product of a corporate system known as the music industry and broadly the entertainment industry. And there are all sorts of people who are not very physically attractive who created Justin Bieber. They marketed Justin Bieber. They made him who he is. And they did so with very meticulous calculation. If you read some of these people's books like Howard Bloom, you read about how they treated the formation of young people's personalities. This is what was done to Michael Jackson. This is what was done to Elvis Presley. This is what was done to Justin Bieber. The whole it's sort of like Hollywood plus, because technically the music industry is not part of Hollywood, but it's the same mentality that goes into crafting actors, right? These are not self-made people. These are promoted people. These are people who are told, we'll offer you fame and riches and everything you want, but you have to go along with what we want. You have to do what we say and date who we tell you to date, this sort of thing. To the point where you look at the Kardashians as the pinnacle American family because they are so constructed, so contrived. Everything, from the sex tape to the sex transition, everything is carefully crafted and calculated. Nothing is spontaneous there. I mean, even if there's some kind of spontaneity or chaos within the inner workings of the minds of the individuals who make up the family, those events are then manipulated and presented in such a way as to form a narrative that can then be promoted through advertising and media. So it is something that, you don't have to call it a conspiracy. You could, all conspiracy means is people privately planning, privately organizing. I guess in these situations, it's not even that private. If we're to call a conspiracy something private, then I would say this is not really private. This is sort of open. It is open planning, but it's something that people aren't aware of because they don't care to look into it. So it's not hidden. It's not secret. It's not as if they're claiming to be totally free agents. And, in some cases they might, but that's sort of part of the performance of being a celebrity is claiming to be spontaneous. When in fact they're not, when in fact they're very well controlled. And sometimes that control leads to mental breakdowns. People like Britney Spears shaving her head, going crazy. This does happen. Heath Ledger overdosing Robin Williams. When you're under that tight control of Hollywood and the entertainment industry broadly, that having that vice grip on your life at all times can sometimes lead to suicidal thoughts and actions, and that's kind of the dark side that people don't like to talk about. Now, when you look at the mindset of the producers, the mindset of the executives who really mold and create these people from childhood, people like Justin Timberlake and Britney Spears, I think, were both affiliated with the Burger King Kids Club, or they have these youth groups. And modeling, when you look at a model and you think she's 18 years old, a lot of times she's only like 16, and you think, well, how can this be legal? Certainly this is lewd, this is lascivious to have 16-year-old girls doing Victoria's Secret modeling. But technically it's not counted as pornography, it's advertising, and that makes it okay. So the exploitation happens from an early age. And so when you combine the fact that so many of these people, like Justin Bieber, are brought up in this industry from an early age, everything is so calculated, everything's so manipulated, everything's so fake, that this sort of mindset that succeeds in terms of the executive positions or the producer positions, the manager positions, the mindset has to be a very controlling mindset. I mean, imagine if you're trying to succeed in this industry, everything had to be calculated, everything had to be meticulous. You have to exercise an incredible amount of control over a young person's life, even if that causes them suffering, even if that causes them pain, even if that causes them psychological damage. You have to shut off your empathy toward this young child, and you have to force this young child to do things and to perform in ways that have to do often with their physical appearance. Do they look good? Does it sound good? Is the appearance good? And so you think about this Hollywood industry, you think about the music industry, you think about these executives and producers. They have to be people with low empathy, a high degree for manipulation. They have to naturally be good at or enjoy having power over young children. And all of these elements sort of combine to, allow us to form a theory or hypothesis that, this personality profile that I'm describing, someone who likes working with children, someone who's manipulative, someone who has low empathy, someone who is sociopathic, someone who is probably more likely than the general population to be a pedophile. That's not even accusing any specific person, but it's just saying in general, if we have a system, if we have an industry that's set up in this way, it's probably going to attract a disproportionate number of pedophiles relative to the average number in the general population. And you do see a lot of that sexual abuse. So that is something that happens and can't be ignored, although it is ignored because people don't look toward the entertainment industry for justice. They don't look toward it for truth. They don't look toward it for anything but escape and entertainment. And that dark side of things, it does sour the entertainment. When you watch Home Alone and you know that the actor, is now addicted to drugs and has been, chewed up and spit out by the industry, and you see how many people that's been done to, and you see the lives that are ruined. I mean, it makes it harder to escape from your own mundane life and the burdens that have been put on you. So there is a huge incentive for most people to just ignore what's in front of their faces, and to even develop a certain tolerance about it, to develop a certain sense, laissez-faire apathy toward it. And there's a sense in which, by consuming this media, the attitudes of these producers, who I've described their personality already, but that attitude and that personality it's projected onto the masses. And so as we consume more Hollywood media, we start to take on not the attitudes of the actors, not the attitudes of the people in the film, but we actually start to take on the attitudes of the artists, the producers, the managers, the executives, the writers who are creating this stuff, who are putting that stuff forward. We actually take on as you consume someone's art, you don't become more like the art itself, you become more like the artist in a sense. So like you watch a lot of porn, you don't become like a porn actor, but you become more like a porn executive. The more you consume content, I think the more you become not like the content itself, but like the content's creator, which is something that I'm not sure everyone realizes. Like when you play a violent video game, you don't just become a violent killer, but you actually become more like a video game designer in a way. That's my opinion, at least. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.